Okay, so if you spend any time with me, you know that when I say this meeting is going to start at noon, it starts at noon, and we're right there at it. So we'll get started. Thank you for showing up for the second installment of What to Expect at the General Conference. Let me just be very clear. This is going to be straightforward. It's a lot of data I'm going to throw at you, a lot of concepts I'm going to throw at you. There will be time at the end for questions and answer, and I will take as much time as we need to do this, because this is important work. It's important to know what's happening in the life of our church. I beg your patience. If you get bogged down in this, just take a deep breath. I promise you it all makes sense. It's beautiful in my mind because everything in my mind is, and then the rest of you all are like, oh my gosh, where's he going? So you're along for the ride. Welcome to the wonderful world that anyone that works with me gets to see. And without further ado, we will get started. So the General Conference is going to be held in Charlotte, North Carolina, starting on April the 23rd, lasting until May the 5th. So it's 2 full weeks. The way I would describe General Conference is imagine Congress that only met one time every 4 years. So imagine Congress meets only one time every 4 years, and then you add a layer of it called Church Congress, because that's about what this is. And that doesn't mean it's holier, it just means it's different. So to get an idea of what this looks like, we are United Methodists. And as United Methodists, to understand what's really happening, I want you to look at this map here. Everything that is not this sort of buff, putty, sand, whatever you want to call that color, everything that is not that color are countries where we have United Methodist churches. So you can see right here in the U.S. with these 4 different colors that are there, or 5 different colors, you get an idea that we are not all of the picture. That there is a lot in Europe and Asia, there's a lot in Africa. You can't really tell it, but over here in the Philippines, there's a color too. And it's not that buff color. I think they tried to make that the gold color, and I want to go seriously. At a distance, it doesn't show up. But those are all places where we have United Methodist churches and a United Methodist presence. So when we talk about that the United Methodist Church is a global, and I don't really like to use that anymore because there is now a new denomination called the Global Methodists. So we are an international denomination. So thinking about that, we're structured this way. So the United Methodist Church does not have one central leader. So who speaks for the United Methodist Church? We don't have a pope. We don't have a chief executive officer of any sort. We have a chair of the Council of Bishops, but even the chair of the Council of Bishops does not speak for the church. He or she speaks only for the Council of Bishops. The only body in the church that speaks and makes decisions for the United Methodist Church is the General Conference. So we have the General Conference, then we have jurisdictional/central conferences. I'll talk about those in a second. Then annual conferences, then districts, and finally down to the local church. So to understand this, the General Conference, it meets quadrennially once every 4 years. It is the official governing body of the United Methodist Church. It sets all of the policies for our denomination. So when it meets in Charlotte in a couple of weeks, there will be 862 delegates from around the globe. One half of those delegates are clergy. The other half are laity. This has been a part of our polity since the beginning, the balance of power, the sharing of leadership between clergy and laity. And so what happens is to look at where these delegates are, the apportionment of delegates is based on the membership of the church at the time the delegates were elected. So the delegates that are meeting in Charlotte were elected to their position as delegates in the summer of 2019, when we thought we would have a General Conference in 2020. We all know what happened, that little flu-like thing that became more like a pandemic, actually was a pandemic, sort of delayed everything until this year. So of those 862 delegates, 55.9% of them come from the United States, another 32% come from Africa, 6% from the Philippines, and 4.6% of them are from Europe. So this sort of gives you an idea of when we go to General Conference, kind of what we're looking at in terms of our international makeup of our denomination. What I will tell you is as the church in the U.S. declines and as it increases outside of the U.S., this percentage of delegates is going to change over time, where we will see fewer percentage of a lower percentage of delegates from the U.S., and an increase in percentage of delegates from the non-U.S. church. So after General Conference meets every 4 years, then we meet in what are called jurisdictional or central conferences. In the United States, we meet in jurisdictional conferences. Outside of the U.S., they meet in central conferences. There's a real reason for that. So what happens is the jurisdictions in the U.S., there's the Western jurisdiction, that's kind of everything on the West Coast. Then there is the South Central, that's like the Texas, Panhandle region, all that. Then there's the North Central, think Chicago, that sort of area. And then you have the Northeast, think New England, all the way down to somewhere around, just north of Virginia. And then you have the Southeast, which we all know that's everything else. So we are in the Southeast jurisdiction. So in the Southeast jurisdiction, there are 14 annual conferences, we'll talk about those in a minute, who are presided over by 11 bishops. So part of the reason why we have only 11 bishops is because as we've had some bishops retire, some annual conferences we have elected to not elect new bishops. It used to be that every annual conference had a bishop, but we're starting to see that bishops are expensive. To get quality bishops, it's harder and harder to find the right ones. And so as an idea to sort of shrink and tighten up the leadership of the church, we have some bishops that are serving 2 annual conferences. For a brief time, we had that in our annual conference where we were served by Bishop Ken Carter, who was also the Bishop of Florida. He is now just simply our bishop. But the jurisdiction or central conferences meet quadrennially. They meet usually in the summer after the General Conference. And then what their responsibility is, they elect bishops for their episcopal areas. So the bishops for their annual conferences. In the central conferences, they also meet to adapt the book of discipline, those decisions made at General Conference. They meet to adapt those for the cultural context of that central conference. So the central conferences in Africa meet to take a look at the jurisdiction, look at what was at General Conference, and are there things that need to be adjusted for more of an African flavor or a European flavor or a Philippines flavor. And this is because when the church was created in 1968, it was a U.S. majority church. Still is, but at that time it was very much a U.S.-centric church. And so decisions that were made at General Conference were very U.S.-centric. And if you have different laws in your countries about property rights or about pension funds and that sort of thing, they had to come up with a way for the non-U.S. church to be able to function and not be beholden to very U.S.-specific things. And so the central conference system was created to allow that to happen. And so that's what happens in the central conferences. So we go from jurisdictions and central conferences down to annual conferences, much smaller regional bodies, which they meet annually. They exist to resource the ministry of the local church. They provide collaborative opportunities for the work of the church to be accomplished. So what I mean by this is that we're a large church. 2,300 members. We're one of the top 6 churches in our annual conference in terms of membership and worship attendance and even staff size. So there are a lot of things that we're able to do because of our economies to scale, like youth retreats. We can just go on a youth retreat. We have enough youth to do that. But when I first graduated from seminary, I had a friend that served a very small church, had about 150 members. They had 2 youth. Having worked with a youth group of 2 in college, and not in college, but in seminary, going on a youth retreat with 2 youth is really like just, basically having brothers and sisters fight things out at home. But if you could take that youth group and another youth group with 2 and another youth group with 2 and another youth group with 2, you could have a real retreat. So the annual conference exists to resource local churches, to provide them the resources they need, the training for their leaders and clergy and that sort of thing, but to also provide these collaborative opportunities that smaller churches may not be able to do. So we are in the Western North Carolina Annual Conference. It has 642 churches in our annual conference. There are 3 retirement communities in our annual conference. We have 8 campus ministries, 4 mission outposts, and approximately 1,500 clergy. So to give you an idea of where we run from, if you go east of here, and if you find the county line between Guilford and Alamance County, right there between Burlington and Greensboro, Gibsonville actually, and you draw a line and you pretty much make that follow those county lines north and south, the 44 counties west of that line comprises our annual conference. Now, the 1,500 clergy includes not only active clergy serving churches, it also includes active clergy who are serving what we call extension ministries, so clergy that are hospital chaplains or military chaplains or campus ministers or professors in colleges and universities. They count amongst this list, and our retired clergy. So we have several retired clergy in our church, and so this is where they spend their retirement, but they're still considered clergy in the annual conference. So 642 active churches. And then we get down to districts. It's a way to take even the larger part of the work of the conference and break it down into smaller sets. And again, it provides collaborative opportunities for the work of the church to be accomplished. It provides sort of an expression of Methodism to have maximum impact. So one of the things that we're talking about here in the Yadkin Valley District, there are 100 churches in our district. There are 44 churches in Forsyth County that are United Methodist, all part of the Yadkin Valley District. One of the things that we're talking about is, what is the maximum impact that we could have if all of our churches came together to build a Habitat House? What is the impact that we have? What's the witness to the community that we have if we work together in that regard? So within our district, as I said, we have 100 churches. We are one of 8 districts. We kind of stretch all the way up from the Virginia line, north of Mount Airy in Surrey County, all the way down into Davidson County to Thomasville, Lexington, that area. We go all the way over to kind of the edge of the Forsyth County line between us and Guilford County, and then we go that way west, pick up Moxville, and sort of rounds it out. So our district superintendent, Sam Moore, he's got 100 churches and a lot of square miles to cover, but he's responsible for us to coordinate with the clergy to make sure that we're doing okay. And within the bounds of our annual conference, as I said, it's 100 churches, 1 retirement community, 1 campus ministry, and 1 mission outpost. And then that gets us down to the local church. Now, the local church still is the very basic unit ministry. So no matter what happens up at the general conference level, the decisions that they make, they inform the actions and affect the work of the local church. But still, the work of the church happens right down here on the ground where we are. We're where the rubber meets the road. We're called to do the work of the church. We're called to reach out to the world. And as I've shared with you all, we're about 2,300 members who are called to follow Jesus, make disciples, and transform the world. So when you look at this, this is sort of how we are functioning together. When we talk about the work of the United Methodist Church, or what does the United Methodist Church do, or how's the United Methodist Church organized, this is how it is. And while the decisions and some of our policies are made at this level, at the General Conference, it affects what we do for 4 years, the real work of the church happens down here. It is collaborated and supported by this. The work of the Central and Jurisdictional Conferences is to give us the leaders that we need, but still the work of the church is down here at the local church level. So, but to understand what's happening at General Conference, we need to know really what it really does. So the General Conference exists to organize the work of the church to fulfill its mission. It sets the policies which govern the life of our church. So it helps us understand the structures that we should have, how they should be made up, that sort of thing. It clarifies the theology of the church for the present age. So our theological task, which is enshrined in paragraph, I think it's 105 in the Book of Discipline, that does not change. It cannot be changed. That is enshrined in that. But to interpret what those theological tasks mean, that's sort of what the General Conference helps us do, and it does it in this present age. I mean, we're over 225 years old, so a lot has happened over time. I mean, a lot's happened in the last 5 years, so we have lots of things to look at. The other part of this is it evaluates and enacts changes to the Book of Discipline. So the Book of Discipline is our guidebook. It's sort of our bylaws, if you will. It's a book that's about this thick, about that size. I forget the number of pages that are in it, but it is full of minutia. It's a fascinating read. It'll put you to sleep if you're not excited about stuff like that, but it's really good. But the work to make those changes to the Book of Discipline, the work is accomplished by petitions. And the petitions that go to General Conference, they can come from our general church agencies, groups like Westpath or Pension Board, or the General Board of Global Missions, or the General Board of Higher Ed, Education, and Ministry. It comes from our annual conferences. It comes from caucus groups, such as the Reconciling Ministries Network, or Marcha, which is a caucus group for our Hispanic ministers and Hispanic ministries, or from individuals. But the key to all of these is these petitions have to come from United Methodists and United Methodist entities. And any change to the Book of Discipline requires a petition. So, for example, until recently, the Board of Pensions of the United Methodist Church was entitled the General Board of Global Pensions and Health Benefits. In 2019, the Board of Pensions decided to rebrand itself as Westpath. So they did this rebrand. They are now known as Westpath, but the Book of Discipline still refers to the General Board of Pensions and Health Benefits. So there are petitions, multiple petitions, for every place in the Book of Discipline where it says General Board of Global Pensions and Health Benefits to change that to say Westpath. So if General Board of Global Pensions appears in the Book of Discipline 15 times, in 15 different paragraphs, 15 different places, how many petitions are there to change it from General Board of Global Pensions to Westpath? 15. So that'll play out here in a minute, because in a moment it's going to seem ridiculous, a number of petitions, and you see what happens here. So what there are 1,100 petitions that our 860 delegates are consider in 2 weeks. 1,100 is a lot. Just to get an idea of this, if you put them in a 3-ring binder, it's this thick. I know that for a fact because I have it upstairs. It's this thick. But take the Westpath example. If there are 15 petitions for Westpath's change, they might take up this much paper, but each one of them is a petition, and it has to be considered. And so each of those petitions, if multiple people submit essentially the same petition, then what happens is there is a committee on legislation that works for the General Conference. They evaluate all of the petitions that come in, and they consolidate them. So if they hadn't consolidated them down to 1,100, I don't know how many there would be. But they've consolidated it down. So then each of those petitions are assigned to one of 14 legislative committees. And so during the first week of General Conference, the schedule works something like this. Every morning, the delegates will come to the Charlotte Convention Center. They will have worship, and then there will be any discussion that needs to happen from something that's going on within the conference, anything that's announced, but no voting business. And then the delegates are sent to meet in their committees. And so each of the 862 delegates is divided up amongst these 14 committees. And so in committee, they have been assigned petitions. And they will look at those petitions, and in that committee, a petition will be, they will discuss the petitions, they will amend the petitions as needed. If you know anything about Robert's Rules of Order or anything about how Congress works, Congress starts down the road, this is my favorite story, Congress starts down the road to put together a highway bill because our highways need work. And somehow or other, that thing goes out from the Transportation Committee, and by the time it magically appears on the floor of Congress, they have provisions in there for libraries. Now, what libraries have to do with highways, I have no idea. But somebody has gotten that petition, that bill, amended to include a library. So a petition that may be on the surface as simple as yes or no, let's go, gets amended. And it can happen in that committee, and so they get debated and all this. But then what happens is once it's amended, if it is or not, it gets a vote by the committee. If the committee approves that petition, then the petition goes to the floor of the General Conference for its plenary session to be debated or to be debated and ultimately voted on. Typically, that's going to take place in the second week of General Conference. However, there are some petitions that just don't need much debate. They're like the no-brainer petitions, like changing Westpath or General Board of Pensions and Health Benefits to Westpath. No one's going to be against this. So those types of petitions will get put on a consent calendar. And so again, if there are 15 petitions of that, they will take one vote on all 15 petitions, and it's done. Because they're saving the floor time at General Conference to debate the more nuanced petitions that come there. Most of the legislation that will pass at General Conference will become effective January 1 of 2025. But there are some pieces that will take a little bit longer, and we'll get to those in a minute. So when we look at all those 1,100 petitions, you can sum them up as there are 7 categories around the 7 most important legislative subjects. There's the removal of the restrictive language regarding the LGBTQ plus policies of the church. the revised social principles, the nature of the church, a new clergy pension plan, the budget for the denomination for the next quadrennium, and then the regionalization of the denomination. And then just because there are a few things that will still pique more interest than others, I created a category called Other. So 1,100 petitions. If you were to print them out in a notebook, it's 1,660 pages of fun. So there we go. So let's talk about some of them in these major sections. So the first one, addressing the restrictive language in the Book of Discipline around LGBTQ plus policies. The petitions that are being recommended, or that have been made, I should say, the petitions that have been made are petitions to remove the harmful language in our social principles around the definition of marriage and around what's called the incompatibility clause. That's a clause where it says that homosexuals are no less worthy of God's grace, but that they are incompatible with Christian doctrine. And so the writers of the petition say, what does it say when we tell someone that it's a child of God that they are incompatible? I mean, that's just hurtful and damaging clauses. So there are petitions to remove that language. There are petitions to remove the funding plan. In our Book of Discipline, it says that the money of the church can be used for a variety of ministry purposes, except for any purpose that might support or care for folks in the LGBTQ plus community. So there's a petition to remove that language. A petition to remove the language blocking the ordination of persons in the LGBTQ community. An opportunity to open the idea of marriage to all clergy, so that the clergy, no matter who they are, that they are called to marry the love of their life, that they are able to do that. There are petitions in there to remove the chargeable offenses. Right now, what was put into the Book of Discipline in 2019 was a petition that if a United Methodist clergy person officiates at a same-sex wedding, that if they're brought up on charges and convicted, that they will lose their job for a year. If it happens a second time, that they are defrocked completely. And so that has been a tension point that's been hanging out there. So far, most conferences have sort of held that in abeyance because they knew this was going to come back up again at General Conference. And then finally, there are some sort of just the judicial process. United Methodist Church needs a little bit of cleaning up around this issue as well. So what this really does is it does this. By removing that restrictive language, and this is key here, by removing that restrictive language, it allows the current structures of the church to function within their realm. So your clergy have always been able to decide who is worthy to get married. If a couple comes to me, Susie and Bill, and they want to get married, and I see all kinds of red flags in their relationship, I can say, I know you love each other, but I'm not going to marry you. I'm not going to officiate that wedding. We have always had that right. Why not let the clergy decide? We know what we're doing. Let us decide along that front. When it comes to the appointment of clergy, our bishops have always appointed clergy to churches with the consultation with the cabinet and the district superintendent. They've always been able to figure out when a clergy person is different, if you will, than the majority of that congregation, if that's a good fit or not, and had those conversations. Let the bishops do their jobs. This says quit tying the hands of the bishop when it comes to appointments. The Conference Board of Ordained Ministry has always been able to determine who is fit and appropriate for ministry. Let them do their jobs. By removing this restrictive language, it says that everything is on the table, and what it means is it lets the Board of Ordained Ministry, the district superintendent, the cabinet, and the bishop decide appointments, and it lets the clergy decide weddings. What this also does, though, is it clarifies that all people are children of God, wonderfully created in the image of God. I talked about that in my sermon on Sunday, what this means to be created in the image of God. And I think when we really start to see each other as created in the image of God, no matter what boxes in life we check, we are better and more closely aligned with the gospel than we've ever been as a human race. It also restores the church's authority to fund and resource ministry. By removing that restrictive language, it lets the church look at the budget and to look at what ministries are being done in its arena and say, this is what matters. These are the needs that we see, and we can put the treasure that God has entrusted to us at play in those ministries. So when we think about this, there we go. When we think about this, what's going to happen? So this is, every one of these sections I'm going to give you this. So here's what I think. Having talked to my colleagues who are delegates to General Conference, some in our annual conference, some in others, having read the tea leaves and looking at the delegations that have been elected by annual conferences back in 2019, there was a wave of centrist and progressive delegates elected from pretty much every annual conference in the United States. I can't speak for Europe or any of the other central conferences, but by and large, what I'm reading is that most of the delegates going from the U.S. and even from Europe are centrist progressives. They feel like this is one of the 3 R's of General Conference that we want to see accomplished. So removing the restrictive language is one of the R's, the other one is regionalization, and the other one is revised social principles. We'll get to those 2 in a minute. So the projection, the outcome. In its pure sense, I would love for this stuff to sail through and let it be just removed and left to those structures to do its work. Doesn't mean that something cannot be amended within a committee. So if you remember back to 2019, one of the options there was a plan called the One Church Plan, which it removed the language, but then it allowed each local church to have a series of votes to decide things. That, at the time, seemed to be a great way forward. I don't know that that's really what we want. In a contentious age where we vote for things, I think let's let those structures that we've entrusted do their work. But again, we'll see what comes out of it. I think restrictive language will pass because, again, the U.S. vote is the majority vote. We have Europe to add to that, so that puts us about 60% of the votes, roughly, that could be in favor of that. Doesn't mean that the Philippines or Africa are against it. I just know that with those 2 measurements there's a high probability that the restrictive language will be removed. But we will just have to wait and see. The second piece of this is the revised social principles. Since our inception, the people called Methodists, now United Methodists, we have advocated for the alleviation of suffering and the care and the well-being of others, and the rights of all people to be seen as children of God. So in 1908, the Methodists, we enshrined our sort of Wesleyan commitment to social holiness with the creation of what was called the Social Creed. Fast forward to the merger in '68, where the Methodist Church in the U.S. and the Evangelical United Brethren, which is a German-speaking offshoot of the United Methodist Church, or of the Methodist Church, which is really at that time was centered kind of in the north-central part of our country. When they merged together, they created a draft of what's called the social principles. Now, '68, a lot of stuff was happening when we did this merger. There were a lot of things that they were saying like, oh, we need to work on this, we need to work on that, we need to work on this. There was just a lot to go on, and so people said, let's do drafts, let's study it over the next 4 years, and then we will vote on it. So 1972 rolls along, and the first round of social principles was adopted. Now, the social principles are not church law. Let me be very clear. They are not church law, but they are statements about the most pressing social concerns of our day. Think of it like a moral compass, or think of it as a flag way out in the distance to chart a course towards with this idea of the kingdom. In 2012, so from 1972 up to 2012, the social principles were amended from time to time. Words were added, words were taken out, that sort of thing. But in 2012, the General Conference voted, recognized that the world had changed tremendously over 40 years. I mean, think about it. 1972, you had Nixon, and we were still looking at black and white TV, and by 2012, we've got the internet, and streaming services are just becoming a thing. So the world has changed tremendously, and so the General Conference votes to have one of our boards, the General Board of Church and Society. That's kind of like the group within our denomination that helps us take a look at social issues, and ask them to revise a social principle, making them theologically founded and globally relevant. So it's not just U.S., but globally. Thinking about what is the church's witness to the whole world. So from 2012 to 2016, the General Board of Church and Society embarks upon a listening and discernment campaign, sending out members of their board, members of their committee, members of their organization out to different different annual conferences, different central conferences, really talking and listening and asking. After 2016, they put the final touches on what they had gathered together and had written what's called the revised social principles. So when they did this, there were over 4,000 people around the globe, different cultures, different races, different sexes, different ages, all reading these to come up with a really rock solid set of social principles. And so they fall into 4 categories. The first is the social principles encompasses the community of all creation. So it looks at this idea of creation in peril. What do we see happening with creation around us? Climate change, that sort of thing. Talks about stewardship of creation. What do we need to do to take better care of the earth? See this as part of our calling. Remember, when God put us in the garden, God said, I give you all of this for you to take care of. So there's an imperative there. Then it moves to the economic community, some of the economic challenges facing our world, the church's response to it, conversations about things like economic justice, fair wages, and such. Then we get to the social community, sort of what does it mean to be the nature of community and some of the specific social issues we look at. So violence, crime, death penalty, that sort of thing. And then we move to the political community, what is the responsibility of government to serve people, and what are sort of the basic rights and freedoms that all people around the world should receive. So as I said, in these revised social principles, there are 50 statements, some of them with 8 substatements. So if it talks about creation, it might break that down into a few things. But there's 50 statements. It was read by 4,000 Methodists around the globe. And these are the most pressing matters facing our world. And remember, this was written, put together between 2012 and 2016, and revised and sort of completely codified by 2020. On Sunday, someone asked me, is there something in there about AI? And I can tell you there is not. Because in 2020, nobody knew anything about AI other than the Terminator movies. And nobody thought that would ever happen. And nowadays, I'm not real, I'm really a robot. Just kidding. But so this is what the church says about it. There could be something added about AI, or that may become another rendition later. But the most pressing matters facing our world and what the church says about them. Now, if you were to read those, at first it might seem that it gets political. So what I want to challenge us on this is, the social principles are not politics. They're gospel. They're about faith and polity, faith and action, and it serves as a moral compass. And so it may challenge us from our worldview, our personal viewpoint, to what the church says. But remember, it's theologically grounded, so this becomes aspirational and a charge for us to balance this idea of personal holiness and social holiness to really be the people God created us to be. And it may change how we look at the world around us and what we do with it. But it's a challenge that's out there before us. So what are the options here? As this goes to, this is one of the biggest pieces of legislation. As this goes, what do I think is happening? I think there's been a lot of work put in this. It would not surprise me if we tracked it that there were some amendments, some stuff that's added or removed from the social principles as they work on this in committee. But in the end, because of the effort put into this by the General Board of Church and Society and the denomination to include as many voices in this as possible, I think this has a high probability of passing. If I had them in front of you right now, if we had the whole list of them in front of you, do I think it's word for word going to pass? Could not tell you that. I would not surprise me with 50 statements and 8 substatements that they're all going to be perfect. When they come out of the blender, I doubt it, but I still think they'll get to the sentiment of what they're going for. Then the next one is this idea of the report of the nature of the church. So back in the 1990s, late 80s, early 90s, there was a book, a report written called By Water and the Spirit. It clarified our theology on baptism. A little bit later, there was one on this holy mystery, which clarified our theology on Holy Communion. You'll hear some of that on April the 7th in that worship service. But this is a chance for us to reflect on the theological nature of the church in this dynamic time. I mean, we've had an understanding of what the church is all the way back to Acts 2. But the church today looks very different than the Acts 2 church. But the function should still be the same. So what this does is this sort of gives us this is a big theological study. It was not done hit or miss. It was done over a series of 4 to 8 years. And so this kind of gives us this idea of what the church should look like. So it's a renewed vision for the church. It understands sort of the mission of the triune God in the church. So it sort of looks at what does God call us to do and what does the church have together. And so it's God is love. It's about the sending of Jesus to us. It's about sending of the Holy Spirit. It's about God who calls and accompanies and transforms. In other words, what does God call us to do? Who does God call us to be? The second one is this idea of the marks of the United Methodist Church, that we're called to be apostolic, that the saving love of God empowers a missional community, that we're not just an entity to ourselves. We don't just come in here like a little club and then go home and chuck each other on the shoulder and say, what a great day today was. No, we're called to go out into the world and take what we hear in this place and share it with the world. That we're called to be Catholic. Now, that doesn't mean Roman Catholic, but really meaning that the saving love of God is meant for all people. It's for everyone, so that there's not a soul in the world that doesn't need to hear what we have found in this place. Finally, a call to be holy, that the love of God is transformative. That has happened in my life, and as I've talked to many of you, it's happened in your lives as well. It's a call to be one that we are better together than we are apart. So even when we have differences, and we do, we are a very purple congregation. Some of you love to tell me your political viewpoints because you think I'm on your side. And let me just tell you what, that door swings both ways, because some of you that are on this color, you think, I'm going to go tell Glenn my point of view because he is on my side. If I can get him on my side, we're going to win. And over here, you're doing the same thing, and I'm in the middle going, this is hysterical. Because the reality is you both love each other. And if we can get past that and focus on the first, we're good. So this idea that we are better together than we are apart, and that when we work together and we share each other's differences and listen to each other, we actually find common ground and where God really wants us to be. And that's why we're pretty purple. We're sent in love, and that's the nature of the church. There will be some petitions that come connected with this report that will maybe change some of the structure of the church, but it's not anything that's going to make this place something that you don't witness or see now. So in the end, I think it's going to pass just fine. I think this is probably one of the most exciting pieces that's before the General Conference that's not super controversial, because this just helps us clarify who we want to be as a church. Finally, not finally, but we're getting there. There's a new pension plan. Westpath always looks at what we're doing to take care of our clergy. I appreciate that, but they're always balancing that with this idea of sustainability. Can we take care of our clergy in retirement without becoming a millstone around the neck of our churches? So they have been studying our pension plan for the last 8 years and realized that there are some changes that need to be made and are rolling out a whole new plan. So it's designed to provide some sustainability, to be affordable for the churches, to promote equity across different compensation levels. So it features some defined benefit stuff. It has got some specific pieces to help some of our lower paid clergy have financial security in retirement. And it provides some flexibility so that their benefits are more portable, that there are better survivor benefits for spouses and children alike. Westpath does such a good job at their stuff. They're kind of one of the non-controversial, when you think about what can happen in church, they do their work so well that everybody goes like, what did Westpath say? Westpath says this, and let's do that, because Westpath knows what they're doing. Everybody for the most part, loves what Westpath does. So I think this pension plan will go through. There will be somebody in the room, just to be clear, that wants to stand up on the floor in their committee and wants to hear themselves talk, and they're going to sound like they're smarter than the Westpath people. It always happens. It makes me smile and giggle, because it's like, go ahead. You're good at what you do, and they're better at what they do. So it's going to be fun. All right, so Westpath comes from this idea of West gets us from John Wesley, and then path is just a path forward. So they sort of, yeah, not T, no, Wes. Yeah, I'm Southern. I sort of slur all my words quickly, so thank you, Lon. Then we get to this one here. This is the budget for the general church for the next quadrennium. We always have to pass that at General Conference, because otherwise it's like if we don't pass a new budget, then the old budget's in effect. So there's 7 funds which really drive the ministry of the church around the world. There's the World Service Fund, which handles our ethnic plans for ministry, the General Board of Church and Society, discipleship, the Central Conference Fund for Theological Education, which handles our theological education in the central conferences, our United Methodist Men, our Committee on Communications, the Connectional Table, which is like the church council for the denomination, the Committee on the Status and Role of Women, the General Board of Global Missions, and the General Council on Race and Religion. So that gets funded. All the work of those agencies gets funded through the World Service Fund. The Ministerial Education Fund, it provides resources for our clergy to go to seminary. When our churches contribute apportionments, that is shared amongst churches based on what we spend, 3-year trailing average of that, and then it gets apportioned back to us as to what we're supposed to give to these different funds. when we give, 25% of our money that we give to the Ministerial Education Fund stays in our annual conference for our students. So we're helping support United Methodists around the globe, including our own, but 25% of it is specifically guaranteed for our people, and then 75% of it, some of it still comes back to our people, but it just sort of gets spread out in a larger pot. The Black College Fund, this is a fund that has been supporting Black United Methodist colleges since its inception. So Bennett College over in Greensboro is a United Methodist school, and it receives some funding through this. Africa University, back in the late 80s, we felt the need to start a university in Africa, provide higher education. It started out around farming and I think nursing, and now it's got theological stuff as well. And then the Episcopal Fund supports our bishops, the 32 in the U.S. and the 22 in the central conferences. Then there's a General Administration Fund. This is the money that just makes all the things work. Our General Council on Finance and Administration, our Judicial Council, which is like our Supreme Court, and it functions very much like our Supreme Court. The Central Conference Committee, that's the group that gets together and helps decide what needs to be adjusted for their context. And then there is one called the Oklahoma Indian Mission, and this is, it is in the U.S. and Oklahoma, but it is still a holdover because at the time that this was done, we felt like there was more work that needed to be really focused, and so all United Methodist churches contribute to help support that annual conference. And then there's the Interdenominational Cooperative Fund. So what happens is we look at this budget. The proposed budget for the next 4 years is $346.7 million. This is a 43% reduction from the budget that we are currently operating on. And the reduction is due to reduced apportionments following disaffiliations. Since 2019, in the United States, 9,600 churches have left the denomination either by disaffiliation or by just dying, to be blunt. That's about 32% of our churches. And because of that, the General Church, the General Council on Finance and Administration, the connectional table said, we can't depend on getting the same amount of money from a lesser number of churches. That's bad math all the way around. So they responded to that and said, we can do better, and so they shrunk the budget. 99% of the budget for the General Church is supported by the United States. So this is really an important fact. They recognize that the church in the U.S. has shrunk, and so we've got to respond to that. What it does is it challenges our denomination to streamline their operations and to right-size its work. That is not a bad thing. We're seeing evidence of that already. Many of our agencies used to operate in separate buildings, and they said, what would it look like if we all moved into one building together? It's like, well, that makes sense. We've done stuff like that. Two of our agencies, the General Board of Global Missions and the General Board of Higher Education Ministry, said, why do we have our own CEO? What if we got a crackerjack CEO to run both of us? And someone says, that's outside the box thinking, and that's what's happening. And so, yes, and what this does is this allows Global Missions to keep its staff to do the work, the Global Missions work the staff does. It allows Higher Education Ministry to keep the staff that does the best work at that. But it has one CEO who can direct and supervise and cast vision and lead, who can be a good CEO in that regard, and let the specialists do the specialist work. And so that's allowed us to tighten up our bounds and to shrink our budgets a little bit. A lot of work has gone into this. This has not been something that was thrown together overnight. They've got economists, mathematicians trying to figure out exactly what do they think is available in terms of financial resources, and they have worked to make this fit. This will be debated in committee and maybe even on the floor of the General Conference, because here's what we know. We know money is power. And when we decide to threaten to take people's money away, even if it's the right thing, it threatens people's power base. We're also talking about their passions. And so when you take money away, subconsciously you're telling somebody that their baby is ugly. Even if it's not, it just says, your baby's fine, we just can't keep feeding it steak. It's got to start eating something else. And so this will be debated. At the end, this will come out and pass as is. I don't see there being any modification of this, because everybody realizes the writing is on the wall. We are a smaller denomination. We are smaller in the U.S., and the U.S. church is footing the bill and cannot keep footing the bill at a level that it was doing it, because we just don't have the resources there. The other side of that's sort of like the stark reality businessman side of it. The other reality of this is the theological side. What the general church realizes, and we see this at the annual conference levels as well, is if we can make our budgets as efficient as they can be and not cut too deep into the bone and be able to do our work, there's more money for ministry in the local church, which is where the work of the church happens best. So they are really sensitive to that. And so I have great confidence in that. The third R, the one that I think is one that we've got to walk out of this. I mean, I think that all three R's, it would please me to no end if all three R's pass, but I think this is one that we've got to have, is this idea of regionalization. Regionalization is a process by which all regions of the church are put on an equal footing. So remember, back in our history, the Book of Discipline and the work of the General Conference is written to be very U.S.-centric. And the Central Conferences, those non-U.S. churches, they're allowed to adapt the Book of Discipline so that they are not beholden to U.S.-centric policies, and they're able to adapt it to their cultural context. But as the church outside the U.S. grows and the church in the U.S. declines, and I promise you all, if we figured out the solution for evangelism, I could grow the church 3 times the size it is today, this still needs to happen. I don't care if the church in the U.S. stops declining and goes on a growth streak and the rest of the church continues to grow or stalls, doesn't matter. Regionalization still needs to happen because this does one thing. It allows us to be all on the same footing. Our current policy doesn't allow for the U.S. church to adapt the Book of Discipline for its cultural context because the thought process in 68 was no one ever envisioned a time when the U.S. church would not be the dominant player. But that day is probably coming. And so if we do not put regionalization on the table where we can each part of the globe, each of the central conferences, including a U.S. central conference, adapt it to our cultural context, it will be problematic practically as well as theologically. So this regionalization proposal creates a U.S. central conference and thus puts us all on the same level. But here's the catch. It's not as simple as passing something at General Conference and letting it get a majority vote, and everybody says, great, we'll start that January 1. Because this is one of the sections that requires changes to our Constitution. So if you think about the U.S. Constitution, if we want to make a change to that, it's got to pass Congress, and then each state's got to have has got to have a constitutional convention, and it's got to pass at least 2/3 of the constitutional conventions before it becomes an amendment to our Constitution. This is why we haven't amended it that much, because it's not an easy process. So what this will require is it's got to pass the General Conference by 2/3, and then it's got to pass by 2/3 in each of by a 2/3 vote of all the voting members of the annual conferences. So if this is decided to happen in April or in May, April-May, by the time we start the annual conference season in the summer, each of the annual conferences will have to vote on this, and it may take until December to find out the results of those votes. So, and then there's some of the details of this, exactly what this may look like, may still need to be hammered out. So what do I think is going to happen? I think the votes are there for regionalization. I think regionalization will pass. I think that for the most part, all of the United Methodist Church sees this as necessary because it puts us all on an equal footing where no one is directly beholden to the other, but we're beholden to each other. So I think that will pass. I do think it will make it interesting to see what happens at the committee level, because I know that there are some, it's a few voices from Africa that don't think regionalization is a good idea. I have yet to figure out why. I have read their white papers up one side and down the other, and simply because all I can get back to is that the proponent that writes the paper says, I just don't like it. I think that's really the answer. But I don't understand what's there, and so I think this needs to pass because it's good for us as a whole, and it prevents us from really further creating any more infighting or schisming that needs to happen. Finally, this gets us to the other thing, the category of other. I'm just going to highlight 2 things that are in there. There are a lot of others, but these are probably 2 that get the biggest play. One is paragraph 2553. That was the paragraph that the 9,600 churches that disaffiliated used to leave the United Methodist Church. There are some folks, that paragraph expired at the end of last year. There are some folks that want to resurrect that paragraph and make that effective for another 6 years. I do not get the sense that there is energy in the body to see that happen. The ruling thought I hear from people is the churches that wanted to disaffiliate, they had 4 years to figure it out. They chose not to do it. Giving them another 6 years is just going to drag out the pain and suffering that much more. There's some argument made that because the Central Conference Committee didn't meet following the 2019 General Conference, that they didn't have a chance to take advantage of this. The Central Conferences also had ways, the Central Conferences have always had ways to leave the United Methodist Church that weren't dependent on paragraph 2553. So the argument that's made there is you all could have figured that out as well. And they're still there. So if after this General Conference, some of the churches or annual conferences in the Central Conference don't like it, there are still escape clauses. So I don't see paragraph 25.3 passing or getting reinstated. The other one is sacramental rights for deacons. You understand that we have two orders of clergy. We have elders like Meg and myself. We have Kate, who's a deacon. The way you can tell us apart is Kate wears her stole across her body. We wear our stoles around our necks. Deacons, elders are ordained for word, order, and sacrament. That is what we were called to do. Deacons are ordained for justice, service, and witness. And so when you go into ministry, you understand these two divisions. And deacons can assist at sacraments. That's why you will see Kate helping with baptisms, why you will see her helping with communion liturgy. But there are places in those two sacraments that only elders get to tread. And so, but there are some deacons that feel like that they should have sacramental rights because that seems to make them think they'll be more equal as far as clergy with us. I would say that most of us as elders don't see a distinction between deacons and elders like one of us is better than the other, but we just have different calls. So this will come up. This will be debated in committee. It may make it to the floor. I don't see it passing because what I really think is if we can get through these other things, everybody's like, that's enough. That's enough. We'll bring that up next time around. That's what I think is going to happen. So what does this mean for us and what can we do? Well, we're not going to know the full impact of any of this until the dust settles. I promise you that on May the 5th, when we stand up for worship that day, I may know some of the stuff. But it may take a full week or two for it all to sort of filter out, and even months to figure out what it really means. We will do our best to kind of keep you apprised as to what we're hearing and learning from General Conference, whether it's through a letter to the congregation or updates on Sunday mornings, that sort of thing. But I promise you we'll do that. But right now, as I've been saying since I've been in the door with you all, we need to stay focused on our mission. Our mission is simply this, to follow Jesus, make disciples, and transform the world. Folks, all the stuff that happens at the top of that pyramid affects us at some level. But it doesn't change the fact that there's a lot of work to do right outside the doors of this church, and we need to work on that. So we need to stay there. The other part is I want us to pray for the work of General Conference. You can start praying for now. I mean, like I said, 1,660 pages. That's a lot of paperwork that needs to be prayed over. But pray for that work. The other thing is to pray for our delegates. When you come to church on the 21st of April, we will pray for the General Conference. But when you leave church, you're going to be given a playing card. It's not like your Topps baseball card with stats and pictures, but it will have the name of one of our clergy or lay delegates from our annual conference. Every person that comes to church is going to get a card when they walk out. That is your person to pray for the next 2 weeks. If you know some of the delegates, you're like, I really want to get so-and-so's card. Here's what we're going to do. Trade with people outside. Don't sit there and try to ask me to flip through the deck. Like, you get who you get. Don't pitch a fit. Go trade with somebody else. That sort of thing. To be a delegate at General Conference, you have to be elected. They were elected in 2019. On the ladies' side, they put together what we call a lookbook, which sort of has all their pictures and a little bit what they think about things. On the clergy side, we did not do that in 2019. I hear we're going to do that for whenever our next General Conference is. It is a very political process. It is something interesting to watch. We record the votes, and you can sit there. Like I have watched in years when I've been in the running, I've watched my numbers go up, and then they drop. And you watch it, and you have to kind of park your ego. If your ego is tied up on your vote getting from your colleagues, you're going to be disappointed. I don't care who you are. So just know that. But we've got great delegates. I know all of our clergy delegates. I know about half the laity, a solid group of people. The ones I don't know, I've read their bios as well. Again, solid group of folks. If you want to do something here in addition to all that, we're recording this session here. We will put this up on our website so you can watch it again. The slides may not be as clear, but all the words, I've said everything that's on a slide, and then some. but also the teaching session I did in the fall on United Methodist beliefs, leveraging our past to chart a course from the future. Those are up there as well. So I encourage you to re-watch those information sessions. The other thing I would ask you to do is please don't fill in the blanks. If someone asks you a question and you don't know the answer and it's along this subject matter, just don't answer. Say, you know what, I don't remember that clearly. Let's go ask Glenn, let's go ask Meg, let's go ask Kate. Please ask us. Don't fill in the blanks. Some people get real excited because if they speak with authority, then it sort of stops the debate, but then everybody goes and repeats the story and it's not correct. If you hear someone repeating something that you think is maybe counter to what has been said here, in a polite Christian way, say, I'm not sure that's right. Let's go ask Glenn before we keep telling everybody, because that is how disinformation gets spread. Finally, as I said, look for updates. Attend worship on the 21st. That's when you get your playing card. On the 28th, we will have a guest preacher that day. It'll be one of our bishops that will be preaching with us. I'll find out that person sometime probably today. It'll be someone not from our annual conference, but they will be preaching for us that Sunday morning, sharing their thoughts about the church, and then come back to church on the 5th to hear more about what happened at General Conference. So that's 3 Sundays in a row that you come to church. I think that's okay. I come here every Sunday too, so we'll have fun together. And then finally, there's this piece. What I'd like for you to do this is I'd like for you to write me a letter about your hopes and dreams for the congregation. And so when you leave the church today, Doug is going to hand you a sheet of paper. It's got all of that prompt on there, so you don't need to worry about this. But I want you to take it home. I want you to write me a letter. Tell me what you're thinking. This is between you and me. You can send it to me. I'll put it in a binder. I'm going to read them, but this just helps me kind of know where you are. A couple of key facts of this. I hope you'll watch the videos so that you understand kind of where the root of all this is. Tell me your hopes and dreams. You have to sign your letter. If you don't sign it, it will just disappear in file 13. But it stays between us. It is a dialogue letter that helps me think about it as we lead what comes out of General Conference, where this takes us as a congregation. And finally this, if there's nothing else, know that no matter where you are on any of the matters of General Conference, I am honored to be your minister. I'll walk that road with you. I love conversation. I've had conversations with several people about hopes, dreams, fears, concerns, all of that, and I want to hear what you think. If you have questions, because there's a lot to process, we're going to take a few moments for Q&A, but if you have questions and you're like, you get home, you're like, I wish I'd asked this, shoot me an email. The door is open, all of that, but please, this is a great opportunity. I think the future is bright for our congregation. I think the future is bright for our denomination, and so I'm thankful for that.